The Addiction to Flavor. Chapter 1. The difference between real hunger and the desire for stimulation. Hunger is a biological function. It is the language the body uses to ask for nutrients, energy, and repair. But what many people experience today isn't hunger. It's a craving for stimulation. It's not a physiological need, but a learned compulsion, reinforced and sustained by a culture of extreme flavor. Real hunger is calm, progressive, and logical. It arises with the passing of time after a period without eating and is accompanied by clear signs: emptiness in the stomach, low energy, even a bit of weakness. The body signals it needs to recharge. And when listened to, it asks for real, simple, functional food: fruits, vegetables, proteins, healthy fats. But the craving for stimulation doesn't wait. It's impulsive, urgent, chaotic. It can appear just minutes after eating. And it doesn't ask for real food. It demands specific things: something sweet, something salty, something crunchy, something that explodes in the mouth. This craving isn't biological. It's neurological, and often emotional. That's the key. The desire for flavor doesn't come from the stomach, it comes from the mind. It's the mind that seeks a release, a distraction, a refuge. And in that unconscious act, something very different from the body begins to be fed: the habit, the dependency, the addiction. The body knows what it needs. But when it is exposed for years to products that aren't real food, it ends up confused. It loses the ability to distinguish between what nourishes and what merely stimulates. And that confusion is no accident. It was induced. The flavor industry, sugars, refined salts, processed oils, artificial enhancers, has turned the act of eating into a sensory extreme. The goal is to provoke pleasure, not to nourish. Products are designed so that the brain registers them as irresistible, even when the body neither needs nor wants them. This is how addiction is created, not to food, but to the sensory impact that product generates in the nervous system. The result is a body overfed but undernourished. A body that gains weight but lacks strength. That receives volume but no substance. Because it ate to feel, not to sustain. And in that imbalance, obesity is built, as a symptom of a distorted perception of hunger. Eating without hunger is like drinking without thirst. But the craving for flavor is so strong that it can override even a body that is already full. That's where the trap appears. We think it's a problem of self-control, when in reality it's an addiction to stimulation, reinforced daily by an environment that normalizes excess. Recognizing the difference between real hunger and the desire for stimulation is the first step to reclaiming power over the body. It means learning to listen to what is truly needed. It means learning to distinguish between physical emptiness and emotional emptiness. And above all, it is the beginning of the end of the lie that made us believe eating is always necessary, when many times, it's simply a way to avoid feeling. The reprogrammed palate. When the body loses its compass. The human body has a natural guidance system that leads it to what it needs. In its pure state, the palate is an internal compass. It recognizes real nutrients, rejects toxins, and feels satisfied when it receives true nourishment. But that compass can be manipulated, reprogrammed, even sabotaged. From childhood, millions of human beings are exposed to artificial flavors designed not to nourish but to create impact. Foods loaded with sugar, salt, chemicals, and additives saturate the nervous system and reconfigure the perception of what is tasty or desirable. What once would have been considered excessive now becomes the norm. The palate, like any sensory organ, adapts. If bombarded with intense stimuli, it loses sensitivity. The same happens with ears exposed to constant noise, they stop perceiving soft sounds. Or with eyes exposed to screens, they grow tired of subtlety. The palate, subjected daily to extreme flavors, loses the ability to appreciate the natural. An apple no longer tastes sweet if you're used to refined sugar. A salad seems bland if your palate has been colonized by industrial sources. Real food, once sufficient, is now perceived as boring. Not because it is, but because the body has been conditioned not to feel it. And the most dangerous part is that this sensory distortion doesn't just affect the pleasure of eating, it affects the entire relationship between the self and the body. Eating is an intimate act, a constant dialogue between what the body asks for and what the mind offers. But when the palate is altered, that dialogue breaks. A short circuit occurs in internal communication. The body speaks, but the self doesn't understand. Or worse, thinks it understands, and misinterprets. This reprogramming of taste doesn't happen by accident. It is part of a system that needs the consumer to lose their connection to the body. If the palate remembered what is truly nourishing, many industrial products would have no demand. The flavor industry needs enslaved palates, dependent on the artificial, desensitized to the natural, confused between what tastes good and what does good. And when that compass is lost, something deeper is lost too, trust in internal perception. You no longer know whether the body is hungry or just stimulated by the smell of a bakery. You no longer know whether you want to eat or just want anesthesia. The reprogrammed palate leaves the self vulnerable, manipulable, disconnected from its physiological truth. In this context, being overweight is not a failure of the body. It's the logical consequence of a body that no longer knows what to eat, when to stop, or what to respond to. It's the visible sign of an invisible confusion. But that sensitivity is not lost forever. The body has memory. When you stop consuming extreme flavor, the palate begins to detox. It starts recognizing again the nuances, the subtle, the real. A tomato regains its taste. A fruit feels like a gift. The body finds its orientation again. The compass, if allowed to rest, starts pointing north once more. And when that happens, everything begins to change. The self stops chasing impact and begins seeking truth. Recovering the palate is recovering instinct. And recovering instinct is beginning to escape the trap. The stolen pleasure. How stimulation replaced satisfaction. Eating, in its origin, was a sacred act. Not for religious reasons, but for connection. It was the moment when body and nature met. The ripe fruit offered by the tree, the simple food prepared with care, the slow cooking, the mindful chewing. It was all part of a daily ritual where pleasure and nourishment were one and the same. That true pleasure didn't come from impact, but from harmony. It didn't lie in the exaggeration of flavor, but in the coherence between what was eaten, what was needed, and what was felt. Authentic pleasure wasn't sought. It emerged naturally from balance. It was calm, sustained, and left a deep sense of well-being. It was the body saying thank you. But that pleasure was stolen. And in its place, something that looks like it, but isn't, was imposed: stimulation. A blast of flavor. A sensory jolt. A quick discharge that excites the nervous system, deceives the mind, and leaves a trail of emptiness. An artificial pleasure that does not nourish, does not satisfy, and does not last. Just as pornography replaces love, or social media replaces true connection, stimulation replaced satisfaction. We eat for impact, not for need. We seek what shocks, not what sustains. And a paradox is created. The more the palate is stimulated, the less real pleasure is felt. Because stimulation has a limit. The body adapts, the system gets saturated, the impact weakens. Then more is needed, more flavor, more salt, more sugar, more texture, more additives, more intensity. But pleasure doesn't increase, it disappears. It becomes an impossible chase. And in that chase, our relationship with food becomes a struggle. The act of eating, once natural and transparent, becomes an anxious experience, full of urgency and unmet expectations. Food becomes entertainment. And what was once true pleasure becomes an empty need that only soothes for minutes but never truly satisfies. We no longer eat for pleasure, we eat for the need to feel something. And when the impact fades, what remains is tiredness, discomfort, guilt, heaviness. What was promised as pleasure turns out to be a trap. And the saddest part is that this state becomes normal. Many people literally do not remember what true pleasure feels like. They never experienced it, or they lost it somewhere in childhood, replaced by constant stimulation. The connection with real food is severed, and with it, the connection to oneself. That is the stolen pleasure, a sensation that seems gratifying but actually wears you down. That activates but doesn't provide. That excites but doesn't sustain. That creates dependency, not freedom. Recovering true pleasure means breaking that chain. It means detoxing from stimulation and learning to feel the subtle again. Enjoying a fruit, a green leaf, a simple preparation. Eating as if the body mattered. As if flavor were not a drug, but a celebration. And for that, one must go through a period of emptiness. A transition time when the confused body no longer receives the flavor jolt it's used to. That's when withdrawal sets in. Anxiety, the false sense that food has no taste anymore, but it's just sensitivity coming back. The palate waking up, and with it, the entire body. Because authentic pleasure is not an explosion. It is a presence. A full, silent, real presence. A natural gratitude that arises when the body receives what it truly needs. The confused body, when the stomach is full but the self remains hungry. One of the most visible symptoms of modern imbalance is this: a full body and an empty self. Eating to the point of satiety, or even excess, yet still feeling hungry. Not a physical hunger, but a vague discomfort, a dull impulse pushing to look for something else, as if something remained unresolved. This happens when eating is unconscious. When the act of eating becomes an automatic response to an external stimulus, a smell, an advertisement, an emotion. The body fills up with volume but receives no substance. The stomach fills, but the self remains unnourished. Real food not only feeds the body, it balances it. It sharpens it. It organizes it. When the body receives what it truly needs, it responds with well-being, clarity, and stable energy. But when it's flooded with products designed to excite, but not sustain, the body enters a state of confusion. And that confusion becomes routine. Emotional impulses are confused with true hunger. We eat to calm anxiety, sadness, anguish. But since the original problem wasn't physiological, food resolves nothing. It just covers up. It pushes the pain inward. And soon, the hunger returns, murkier, more dissatisfied, more demanding. Eating without knowing why is like speaking without listening to your own words. It's an automatic expression with no direction. The body, lacking inner guidance, responds to impulses, not needs. It's fed without meaning, and therefore never feels full. True fullness only comes when what is received matches what is genuinely needed. That's where the vicious cycle appears. eating without need, feeling heavy, feeling guilty, eating again to calm the discomfort. And in that cycle, the body loses its ability to say, enough. Because enough no longer comes from the stomach, it comes from a consciousness that is absent. You can fill a body to its limit and still leave it malnourished. You can carry extra weight and still lack energy. Because what makes you gain weight doesn't always nourish, and what satisfies in terms of calories doesn't always feed. In truth, the body isn't seeking calories, it's seeking truth. And so the body is left alone. It functions, but without guidance. It reacts, but doesn't decide. It becomes an altered machine operating under external stimuli, disconnected from its inner truth. That body, sooner or later, begins to send signals: bloating, fatigue, acidity, fluid retention, low energy, disturbed sleep, unstable moods. These aren't malfunctions, they are wake-up calls. They are ways the body says, "You're giving me volume, but not life." And it's at that point that we realize real hunger isn't in the stomach, it's somewhere else. The body is asking for something it's not receiving. Something not found in packages, snacks, or sugary drinks. Something subtler, deeper, more real. It's a hunger for presence. For truth. For living nourishment. It's a hunger for silence, for pause, for connection with what we eat. It's a hunger to feel the difference between being full and being nourished. Recognizing that hunger is the beginning of healing. Because only when we stop eating to silence ourselves do we begin to eat in order to listen.